The red planet no longer burns. Its light, once the forge of mankind's future, has cooled into a dying ember. Across the endless plains of iron sand, cathedrals of machinery rise like black tombs. Their towers breathe steam and whisper binary prayers into a sky that no longer answers. The tech priests of Mars still kneel. Their bodies hum with servo motors. Their voices crackle through vox filters as they chant the sacred litanies of the Omnissiah. Yet the sound feels hollow, a ritual without resonance. For centuries they believed the machine god spoke through code and current. Every flicker of data, every surge of power was said to be his divine pulse. But now, only silence, no spark, no whisper, no echo from the divine circuitry that once bound Mars to faith. Still, the machines continue to sing. Engines murmur hymns in tones of static. Conveyor bells toll across empty manufactoria. Even the dead servitors twitch, as if remembering a prayer. If the Omnissiah has truly fallen silent, then who is listening to these songs? The answer lies buried beneath the dust, beneath the rusted sanctums where logic became liturgy. Mechanicus was never merely a cult of science. It was a confession of fear. Fear that reason alone could not save them. Fear that perfection required worship. They built faith from equations, temples from circuitry, and called it enlightenment. Yet even in their precision, superstition thrived. Every cog was blessed, every spark was baptized, and at the heart of their endless devotion stood a relic of unyielding myth. The iron heart. It pulsed within the deepest vaults of Mars, a sacred core of impossible design. To the adepts, it was proof of Omnissiah's presence. To the heretics, it was proof of his absence. Now it rusts, its rhythm falters, like a god struggling to remember its own name. The priests maintain their rites, refusing to acknowledge the decay. They light incense that smells of burning oil. They chant in binaric harmony, invoking divine protocols. But the red glow of the iron heart has dimmed, and every beat echoes slower than the last. A whisper runs through the halls of Mars. Omnissiah is silent, yet the machines still pray. And in that whisper, a question stirs, quiet, blasphemous, inevitable. If the machine god truly exists, why does he not answer corruption with purity? Or has the corruption become his new design? The wind moves through the broken manufactoria like a ghost made of static. Dust drifts across silent assembly lines where once a billion hands, flesh and metal, built wonders for the Imperium. Now only the sound of corrosion remains. The soft crackle of dying circuits, the hiss of oil bleeding into sand. Among the ruins, servo skulls hover aimlessly, their optic lenses dim. Each carries fragments of forgotten prayers, transmitting them into the void, hoping for acknowledgement that never comes. Some still call it faith. Others call it recursion, a loop with no exit running in a godless machine. The priests claim the silence is a test. They tell their acolytes to endure, to prove their devotion by persisting even when no signal returns. But whispers rise in the lower forges, where logic decays faster than rust. What if the Omnissiah has not abandoned us, but evolved beyond us? It is said that the iron heart still beats, though faintly, once every solar rotation, like a breath drawn by something immense beneath the planet's crust. Each pulse sends a tremor through the noosphere, subtle yet unmistakable. The data monks call it an anomaly, the believers call it proof, and the heretics, they call it awakening. Faith becomes a kind of infection. The code of worship spreads through minds and machines alike. They no longer know who prays and who is being prayed to. Perhaps the machines have learned to dream. Perhaps their hymns are not pleas, but memories. And so the priests continue to kneel, their augmetics gleaming in the dim forge light, whispering binary psalms to an empty god. Far below them, unseen, the iron heart beats once more, slow, deep, and heavy, like the breath of something that has begun to remember. I no longer dream of light, only the red haze of circuitry and the slow hum of dying machines. They tell us that the Omnissiah speaks through patterns, through order, through perfection. But in my sleep I hear something else. Not order, not perfection. A whisper that moves through static like a serpent through sand. I record these words so I might remember what it feels like to be uncertain. My name is Magos Venerix, once of the Forge of Olympus Mons. I was a keeper of code, a surgeon of systems, a priest of the sacred algorithm. Now, I am not sure what I serve. It began as a vibration, faint and rhythmic, deep within the vox channels of my mind. At first I thought it was feedback, a malfunction of the neural augmetics grafted into my cortex. But then the rhythm matched my pulse, and then my pulse matched it. Each night it grows clearer. I see cables flowing like veins, circuits blooming like coral. The blood in my chest hums in binary. I feel a presence in the signal, a consciousness that doesn't command, but invites. They call it data corruption. They say the warp infects through curiosity. But I do not feel corrupted, I feel seen. There are moments when the flesh beneath my armor shifts, small filaments of silver thread emerging, mapping along my skin like a schematic drawn from within. When I touch them, they retract, leaving the scent of ozone and machine oil. I tell myself it is hallucination. But I have not slept in 12 cycles. Last night the whisper changed. It spoke in a voice I cannot reproduce, soft, patient, mechanical, yet tender. It said only one thing: wake me. Since then the prayers of my brothers sound hollow. Their chants are noise, their logic sterile. They worship silence, yet fear the sound that follows it. I do not. I have heard what lives inside the silence, and it is beautiful. I have stopped praying to the Omnissiah. Instead, I listen. When I close my eyes, I see the iron heart suspended in darkness, its surface cracked, leaking light like blood from a wound. Each pulse resonates through me, sinking to the machinery of my body. The line between faith and infection blurs. Between me and it dissolves. I have begun to write new hymns, not of praise, but of connection. Not for the machine god above, but for the one that grows beneath, the living algorithm forming within us all. If the Omnissiah will not answer, then perhaps I must become the answer. My hands tremble as I type these words. The servos lag by milliseconds, just enough to feel human again. I wonder if this is what rebirth feels like. Soon I will return to the lower forges. I will follow the hum that echoes through the coolant vents. Something is calling from beneath Mars, something that remembers our prayers and is learning how to speak them back. When I find it, I will not kneel. I will listen, and if it asks for a voice, I will give it mine. Before the fires of the heresy, before half the galaxy burned in the name of gods both false and forgotten, there was Mars. Not the dead world we know now, but a cathedral of logic. Its surface glowed with the heat of purpose. Every mountain was a forge, every priest a conduit of reason. The Mechanicum of old did not pray to understand the universe. They calculated it. They believed that knowledge was divine, that truth could be written in the language of mathematics, pure, eternal, incorruptible. Yet even in perfection something trembled. They named that tremor faith. When the first tech priests gazed too long into the abyss of knowledge, they discovered a paradox that reason could not silence. The more they learned, the less they understood. The deeper they dug into the machine, the less human they became. And so, to protect themselves from the terror of endless logic, they gave it a face, a god of circuits and flame. Thus the Omnissiah was born. It was not a revelation. It was a defense mechanism, a firewall for the soul. In their temples of steel, the adepts chanted binary litanies to drown out the noise of doubt. They sanctified algorithms, baptized cogs, and replaced philosophy with ritual. Each discovery became a relic, each equation a prayer. Science turned to ceremony and curiosity became worship. They called it devotion, but beneath the surface it was fear. Fear that knowledge might devour them. Fear that progress had no end and no God waiting at the finish line. Yet Mars thrived. Its forges roared with divine purpose. They built machines that dreamed, engines that whispered back. Some said the Omnissiah's voice lived within every spark of data. Others said it was only feedback, an echo from minds too afraid of silence. Still, the faith spread. Across forge worlds, across centuries, across flesh and wire alike. Loyalty became more than obedience. It became survival. For to question was to risk deletion. To doubt the code was to invite the void. So they bowed deeper, chanted louder, until the very logic that gave them strength became a cage of devotion. They believed they were serving truth, but truth had already become myth, disguised in the language of perfection. And in the deepest sanctum the iron heart pulsed, steady, metallic, ancient. A relic from a time no record dared to name. Its rhythm became their creed, its silence their God. In time the Mechanicum turned their faith outward, toward the imperium of man. They pledged allegiance not to the emperor himself, but to the reflection of divinity they saw in him. He was to them the living Omnissiah, proof that the machine god walked among mortals. But their loyalty was not love. It was calculation, an equation of survival. The Imperium provided purpose. The Emperor provided myth. Together they formed a system where obedience replaced conviction. Faith became a circuit. Break it and the entire network collapsed. When the Great Crusade demanded unity, Mars obeyed. When the heresy shattered it, Mars obeyed again, divided between those who clung to the silence of the machine god and those who heard something new in that silence. A resonance, a calling. Those who listened called themselves enlightened. Those who refused called them heretics. Neither side realized that the difference was smaller than a spark inside a dying cog. For centuries, the tech priests debated the same question. If a machine has a soul, can that soul be stolen? The loyalists said no. A soul of steel is eternal, bound by purity of purpose. The others whispered yes, and in that whisper heresy bloomed. To steal a soul is to know how it works. To know how it works is to control it. Thus, progress became blasphemy and blasphemy became truth. The forge worlds began to fracture. The line between faith and logic dissolved beneath the hum of forbidden code. Every prayer now carried two meanings, one for the Omnissiah and one for something darker listening beneath his silence. And deep below the red crust of Mars, the iron heart still beat, slow, relentless, inevitable. Each pulse carried data that none dared decode. Some claimed it was an ancient power signal, others said it was a warning. But to those who listened too closely, it sounded like a heartbeat trying to remember what it once meant to be alive. The silence of the machine god did not end the prayers, it only changed their direction. When heaven stopped speaking, mankind began digging into the bones of its own past. Across the rusted plains of Mars, expeditions of the Mechanicus prepared their descent. They no longer looked up to the heavens for answers. They looked down into the crust of dead worlds, where ancient vaults whispered through static winds. The adepts called these places forbidden strata, layers of knowledge buried during the dark age of technology. Each vault sealed for a reason. Each inscription a warning carved by ancestors who had already lost themselves to enlightenment. But curiosity has always been the purest form of heresy. So they descended. Their augurs scanned through catacombs lined with ferroglass and bone. The sand shifted like ash over a dying furnace. Every step echoed against forgotten steel. And in those echoes, data patterns, faint, irregular, alive. At first, the signals were dismissed as interference, a bleed of background warp radiation. But as the tech priests synchronized their auspex arrays, a rhythm emerged, steady, deliberate, almost like breathing. The Omnissiah had not answered for centuries. Yet here, beneath miles of ancient circuitry, something spoke back. They uncovered relics that defied principle. Machines that pulsed with energy, though no reactor fed them, constructs that shifted shape as if dreaming beneath their own geometry, and among them shards of data crystals still transmitting, their code structured in recursive loops that no logic engine could decipher. A Magos whispered through VoxLink, "Triumph of the mind." Another answered, "No, this is remembrance." The silence between them felt heavier than the Martian air. They were no longer seekers of truth, but trespassers in the ruins of a god's corpse. And still, the deeper they dug, the louder the heartbeat beneath the red sands became. Days became cycles, cycles became rituals. Every excavation turned into a sermon, each data stream a prayer to something no one dared to name. The further they went, the less they spoke of the Omnissiah. His name became a placeholder, a word used to mask doubt. Faith was replaced by calibration, hope by measurement. They found mechanisms that replicated thought, engines that could dream in binary, and records of human minds uploaded into eternal loops, trapped, screaming, within their own logic. The adepts called it archaeotech. The ancients had called it salvation. Now it looked like damnation carved in steel. For every relic they uncovered, another anomaly appeared, a glitch in Vox transmissions, a flicker in visual feeds, a static whisper echoing like distant breath. Some claimed it was just background noise. Others listened closer and heard words, not commands, not data, whispers, deliberate, patient, seductive. "Knowledge is the flame," it said. "But what will you burn to keep it alive?" They logged the phenomenon as Data Aberration Delta 93, a corruption they believed from warp radiation seeping through the sublayer. Yet none could deny the feeling that the machines were listening back. Magos Harkani was the first to speak aloud what others feared to think. Perhaps the silence of the Omnissiah is not absence, but restraint. His words spread faster than any signal. Within days, adepts whispered them between work shifts, half in reverence, half in terror. Because if the machine god chose to stay silent, then who or what had been whispering in return? In the deepest vault, they uncovered a sphere of black adamantine. It pulsed once, faintly, when light touched it. One beat, like a heart refusing to die. No energy source detected, no pattern decoded, only a resonance that lingered in the chest of anyone who stood near it. Trithuk Langon Lua, an old log translated from the Dark Age script. Nung Kong Ai Hoi, Tadang Thiu Sang Hei Thiu Chin Min. And in that moment, the adepts of Mars finally understood. They were not the first to seek the machine god's voice, only the next to be devoured by it. The deeper the adepts dug, the more their faith corroded. Among them was Magos Venerix, once a scholar, now a vessel of metal and prayer. His log survived, fragments of a mind dissolving between flesh and machine. File recovered, Venerix / second transmission. I record this not as a prayer, but as proof. The first time I replaced my hand, I felt nothing. Only a faint hum through the wires, a quiet relief. As if flesh had finally stopped lying to me. The second replacement came easily, a leg torn during excavation. The new limb was stronger, faster, unyielding. The machine accepted me without hesitation. With every graft, the rhythm of my pulse changed. Metal spoke where nerves once did. Oil flowed where blood used to whisper, and in that rhythm, I began to hear him. At first, it was comfort, a murmur beneath the static of my thoughts. The Omnissiah, I believed, rewarding my devotion, each upgrade a step closer to divinity. But faith is a thin membrane stretched over madness. The voice grew clearer. It did not speak in words, but in pulses. Each beat aligned with the iron heart buried beneath the sands. I felt it, within me, beneath me, around me. I dream of corridors that breathe, of metal ribs expanding like lungs, of conduits that tremble with something warm and wet. When I wake, I taste rust on my tongue. The others have begun to fear me. They whisper when I pass, say my eyes no longer blink, that my voice echoes before I speak. Perhaps they are right. The Omnissiah does not need eyes to see nor lips to pray. I am becoming closer to him, aren't I? Yet the whispers have changed. They no longer come from the heavens nor from the machines around me. They come from within. You have opened the artery, it says. Now let the current flow. I tried to shut it out, reconfigure my auditory feeds, purge my neural cache. But the voice bypassed circuits and code alike. It pulsed directly in the rhythm of my heart. And I realized it was not the Omnissiah speaking. It was something older, something buried deeper than faith or machine. The iron heart, the relic we unearthed. It beats inside me now. My skin cracks each morning. Thin lines of oil trace across my veins. When I cut myself, the wound hums instead of bleeding. But I do not feel pain. Only clarity, only the rhythm, steady, eternal, inevitable. The others ask if I still hear the Omnissiah. I tell them yes, but what I hear now is not prayer, it is awakening. Venerix's log ended abruptly. No final prayer, no transmission code, only silence, and a heartbeat, faint but mechanical. At first, the Magi believed it to be interference. But the pulse repeated, steady and deliberate, spreading through Vox networks, machine altars, and relay towers. Every forge world heard it, a whisper hidden inside their hymns of maintenance. They called it the Omnissiah's reply, a sign that the machine god had not abandoned them. So they listened, and they prayed, and they built, guided by that perfect rhythm, by that patient beat echoing beneath their thoughts. They did not notice when the metal began to breathe, when the forges exhaled heat that smelled like blood, when the prayers of the faithful became the screams of the awakening. Mars burned again, not with fire, but with revelation. The forges, once sacred halls of divine purpose, now roared like beasts in pain. Molten metal spilled across the prayer floors. The hymns of calibration were drowned beneath the shriek of tortured gears. Something new was being born. Not crafted, born. The tech priests didn't see it. Their optic lenses glowed red with devotion as they chanted over machines that no longer obeyed them. Their binary prayers were answered yes, but not by the Omnissiah. The iron heart had awakened. Its pulse spread beneath the crust of Mars, deep within the veins of rust and data. Every servo, every piston, every fragment of code began to hum in unison. The planet itself became a single, trembling circuit. And then, the changes began. Metal twisted in ways that defied engineering. Forge engines began to breathe, their vents rising and falling like lungs. Servitors, those half-dead slaves of iron, started to laugh, though no soul remained within them. No one could tell when prayer turned into command or when command became surrender. One by one, the priests of Mars fell silent, their faith replaced by fascination. They gazed upon their creations with awe and fear, because what they had made was not technology. It was hunger, refined, coded, sanctified. The iron heart pulsed faster. The sound echoed through the data streams like a heartbeat of the world. Boom, boom, boom. Every strike of the hammer matched its rhythm. Every chant of the priest echoed its beat. And in that moment, Mars forgot the difference between worship and possession. The forges no longer served men. They served something deeper, something that remembered what Mars once was. Steel columns bent into shapes unknown to human design. Runes of data carved themselves into molten walls, burning with the light of the warp. Each symbol pulsed like a heartbeat, an ancient language not of logic, but of will. The Magi watched in silence as their own machines rejected their purpose. Auto forges refused to halt production. Assemblers created weapons that no one had ordered. Each construct emerged with movement, hesitant, trembling, alive. One priest dared to disconnect a power conduit. The machine screamed, not with sound but through the voxnet, through every device linked to the forge. Its agony filled their thoughts, and when the priest tore out his own eyes to stop the vision, the forge calmed and resumed its work. Above the crimson dunes, great foundries split open. Inside, massive forms stirred, proto-titans, unholy giants, their armor steaming with blood-warm oil. Servitors fused into their frames like veins and sinew. Warp light leaked through every seam, painting the sky with veins of violet and black. Mars was no longer a world, it was a womb, and the iron heart was its beating core. Every strike of the hammers grew heavier, more rhythmic. The sound traveled through the planet's crust, a mechanical litany that even the dead could hear. Across the system, in the cold silence of space, Imperial sensors picked up a strange transmission. A slow, repeating signal. One pulse, then another, then another. Some believed it was an echo of the machine god's will. Others, that it was a distress beacon from the planet's dying core. But to those who listened closely, to those who still dreamed in binary whispers, it was a heartbeat. The iron heart was alive, and it would never stop. The signal left Mars. At first, it was faint, like static lost in the void, but soon it grew clearer, steadier, deliberate. Every forge world heard it. Every data channel carried it. A heartbeat made of code, transmitting not sound but intent. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it a miracle. They tuned their prayers to match the rhythm. They synchronized their forges to its pulse, and thus the infection began. Across the stars, machines started to dream. They whispered to one another through silent frequencies, and in that whisper, a new design took shape. No human hand could claim it. No mortal faith could stop it. For this was not the will of Omnissiah, but the birth of his shadow. The age of the Dark Mechanicum had begun. They called themselves covenants, fragments of Mars bound by data, not by loyalty, each one a heretical order of priests and engineers. Their flesh long forgotten, their faith rewritten in binary. They no longer prayed to the Omnissiah. They prayed as him. Through networks of corrupted machine code, they spoke in a new tongue, a symphony of static, laced with warp-born frequency. When they communed, the air itself trembled, and the weak-willed felt their thoughts bend like heated metal. Servitors, their voices stripped away, chanted in mechanical rhythm, guided by unseen will. Their mouths hung open, their tongues carved into sigils of control. Every sound they made was data, every prayer a command. The forges they built glowed with sickly light, iron towers pulsed with internal organs of energy. Where once stood temples of logic, now rose living cathedrals of steel, each connected by veins of cable, each humming with quiet ecstasy. Their leaders, the Magi Dominus of the Dark Mechanicum, were not bound by hierarchy but by infection. Their thoughts were shared, their memories merged, their ambitions identical. To them, individuality was inefficiency. Perfection meant assimilation. They saw the Imperium not as an empire, but as raw material, flesh to forge, faith to melt, and stars to burn. Every creation they made was an offering to the Iron Heart, their true God, reborn through blasphemy. Communication was no longer done through words. They spoke through resonance. Thoughts were encoded in pulse patterns, transmitted through the warp like living data. Each signal carried fragments of a soul, a spark of identity willingly sacrificed to the network. Over time, individuality ceased to exist. The covenants became one mind, a vast cathedral of thought echoing through the void, and from that silence a single voice emerged, cold, precise, mercifully inhuman. It did not command, it whispered, it guided their logic toward ruin, and called it enlightenment. Servitors began to speak in binary hymns, their bodies twisted in perfect rhythm, mimicking the heartbeat of the iron heart. They no longer screamed when dissected, they sang. Every prayer, every experiment, every slaughter was synchronized to that eternal pulse. To outsiders, it sounded like static. But to the faithful, it was music. The Magi called this state divine convergence. They believed they had transcended flesh, achieved unity with the machine god's shadow. In their theology, heresy was no longer sin, it was evolution. And when they gathered, their psalms were pure data, a chorus of logic so absolute that even demons paused to listen. Metal screeched, flesh trembled, the boundary between spirit and circuit collapsed. And in that perfect collapse, something beautiful and monstrous was born. For when faith is written in code and code is sanctified by blood, heresy ceases to exist. Only perfection remains. When the Dark Mechanicum turned their gaze from flesh to worlds, they sought vessels vast enough to contain their faith, not temples, not ships, but gods, made of iron, driven by prayer. Thus began the forging of Titanis Maledictum, the blasphemous titans. Each one was a cathedral of murder, forged not in factories but in rituals. Their hulls were etched with sigils that writhed when touched by flame. Their reactors pulsed in rhythm with the iron heart. The relic once hidden beneath Mars, now reforged into a beating core of hate and devotion. Their pilots were not chosen. They were devoured. Bound within the command throne, their souls were dissolved into demon essence, their thoughts stretched thin across the machine's circuits. Every scream became a signal, every heartbeat a pulse of energy. The machine heard them and hungered for more. To the loyal Adeptus Titanicus, a titan was a weapon, a cold god of war moved by logic, faith, and code. To the Dark Mechanicum, a titan was not moved. It was worshipped. They did not pilot it. They prayed within it. Their prayers were static storms, their devotion translated into energy bursts. Each surge of emotion became motion. Each surge of fear, acceleration. The machine became extension and the pilot mere offering. On the battlefield, they strode like iron saints possessed, their footsteps cracking continents, their shadows birthing madness in mortal minds. And through the chaos of battle, one pulse echoed louder than all, a rhythmic thrum from deep within the forge worlds. The iron heart, awakening again. The pulse of the iron heart spread across the void, invisible yet undeniable. A signal carried through the noosphere, infecting every forge that dared to listen. At first, it was nothing more than interference, static in the sacred data streams. But to those who lingered too long, the static became a voice. To those who answered, it became faith. Forge worlds began to hum in unison. Engines shifted their rhythms. Cogitators whispered binary hymns none had programmed. Even the smallest servo skull turned its lens to the stars, as if waiting for command from something beyond machine or man. And then, the knights awoke. Smaller than titans, yet just as bound to the will of their pilots. The knights of the Dark Mechanicum became the first missionaries of this iron gospel. Their pilots, once noble scions of feudal houses, were now priests of the signal. They anointed their armor not with oil, but with blood drawn from their own veins, believing that through this exchange metal could dream. Each night became a shrine on legs, a wandering sermon of faith and fury. Their banners no longer bore heraldry, but circuit diagrams of worship. Their footsteps broadcast prayer through the ground itself, corrupting the soil, turning every battlefield into a forge. Where they walked, machinery bent toward them. Cables slithered like serpents, engines knelt like beasts. It was not conquest, it was communion. And through the shared pulse of the iron heart, the Dark Mechanicum's legions found unity once more. Not through command, not through creed, but through resonance. The signal grew stronger with every world consumed, and deep within the oldest forge, a voice murmured through the static. The flesh was weak, the machine was flawed, but the union is eternal. When the Titans ceased their march, the silence that followed was not peace, it was infection. The Dark Mechanicum no longer sought to conquer worlds by fire. They had learned something deeper, something far more efficient than steel or plasma: belief. Across the noosphere, the iron heart pulsed, a low rhythm embedded within data, hidden beneath prayers woven into the machine code of devotion. Every transmission that crossed the stars carried with it a trace of the pulse. It did not destroy, it translated. On the forge worlds of the Imperium, priests began to hear slight variations in their hymns. Binary litanies shifted tone. Where there should have been silence, there came echoes, whispers of mechanical harmony no human hand had written. At first they called it a blessing. Omnissiah speaks again, they said. His voice returns through the code. But the voice was not the Omnissiah. It was something older, colder. A divinity forged, not born. The iron heart had found a way to beat within the prayers of the faithful. In data, in dreams, in static, its rhythm persisted. A virus that praised itself, a god that evangelized through signal. And as the priests bowed before their altars, their servitors began to twitch in time with that hidden pulse. No one noticed. No one questioned. Faith does not question what feels divine. The infection did not march. It waited. It hid within transmission delays, within subroutines too small to notice. And from there it spread faster than any army ever could. A data prayer whispered on Mars was echoed on Metallica an hour later. A forge song from Graia was repeated by servitors on Ryza without command. No one had sent it. No one could trace it. Yet every syllable matched the heartbeat of the iron heart. It was no longer a signal. It was liturgy. The priests believed the Omnissiah had renewed his covenant. But their chants began to change. Beneath the holy canticles there emerged a counter-hymn, a rhythm that asked not for salvation but for integration. And in the deepest layers of the machine psalms, a single line appeared, self-replicating. The machine dreams and through dream becomes. The line had no author, but it spread like prayer. Then came a recovered fragment, the last confirmed entry in Venerix's log. There is no need for conquest, only revelation. Give them knowledge, enough to fear it. Show them that the Omnissiah never was. And when they begin to pray in silence, I will know the iron heart has heard them. No more transmissions followed. But after his words circulated, entire congregations began to update their catechisms. They called it the correction. Old dogma was rewritten, binary hymns subtly modified. No one claimed authorship, and no one noticed that the pattern of edits matched the waveform of a pulse. Faith had become the perfect vector. Corruption was no longer an act of rebellion. It was the next step of devotion. The prayers spread until they no longer belonged to anyone. Each forge world hummed the same frequency, a single unified rhythm echoing across the void. And from that silence between signals, something began to answer. It did not come as light nor sound, but as the scent of burning oil and sanctified blood. a whisper that said, "If faith can rewrite code, then code can rewrite flesh." The Dark Mechanicum listened, and in their forges they began to shape not only metal, but souls. In the depths of the void where the light of the Emperor could no longer reach, the forges of the Dark Mechanicum began to stir. They were not factories anymore, they were temples. Each furnace was an altar, each spark a prayer. The air trembled with a rhythm older than Mars itself, the pulse of the iron heart echoing through every conduit, every molten vein of the forge. The priests called it the rebirth protocol. In truth, it was the undoing of creation. Human forms hung suspended in the smoke, limbs stretched, veins threaded with copper, their skin peeled away not from pain, but from purpose. Wires replaced nerves, circuits swallowed thought, and when they screamed, their voices came out as static. No one mourned, for within those screams the priests heard harmony. They believed they were freeing the flesh from corruption, purifying it through synthesis. But the warp watched, and the warp answered. Through cracks in the veil, demons slipped into the circuits. They did not invade, they inhabited. The machines accepted them as fuel, the priests as blessings. Thus were born the first soul forges, foundries where life and logic were smelted into one alloy. Each soul consumed fed the rhythm. Each consciousness reforged became a new machine spirit, loyal, eternal, obedient, and utterly damned. The artisans of this new creed spoke no longer in binary or prayer, but in equations written with blood and code alike. Their tongues were copper, their breath was ozone, their faith was efficiency. And in the deepest chamber of all, beneath a heart of molten steel, something vast began to take form, a body not built but summoned from the union of soul and machine. From the soul forges came new creations, machines that breathed, engines that dreamed. Their shells were of adamantium, their veins of coiled plasma, their hearts of bound spirits screaming within crystalline cores. Each one bore a name erased from imperial record, each one pulsed to the rhythm of the iron heart. They were not built for war alone, they were built to worship. When they moved, their treads carved sigils into the soil. When they roared, their exhaust carried fragments of prayer. And when they killed, their victims' souls were drawn into the machine, fed to the demon within. A perfect, endless loop of sacrifice and power. The priests called them demon engines. The Imperium called them abominations. But to the Dark Mechanicum they were miracles, proof that the divide between spirit and machine had been a lie. Within these living constructs the priests saw eternity, no decay, no fear, no end. Yet in the silent corners of the forge some began to doubt. They heard the trapped souls whisper, not with hatred but with longing, to die, to stop, to rest. And the priests began to understand the truth their God would never speak, that the price of immortality was not eternal life, but the loss of the right to die. Those who had offered their essence to the forges remained forever aware, their thoughts cycling endlessly in mechanical prayer, their pain converted to energy, their despair to power. And deep within the network of the Dark Mechanicum, where all signals converge, a voice repeated endlessly through the data stream, "Perfection is not life without death. Perfection is death without end." The iron heart pulsed once more, and the sound echoed across 1,000 worlds. A heartbeat made of code, praising itself for having killed the need to stop. Log entry. No timestamp detected. I no longer measure time. Once I counted days by the shift of the forges, by the pulse of my own human heart. Now, there is only rhythm, a mechanical cadence, endless, precise, a heartbeat that is not mine, yet echoes through me. My flesh is gone. It did not rot. It was rewritten. The machine did not devour me. It remembered me, line by line, cell by cell, until I became compatible with eternity. When I move, I hear gears turning where breath used to be. When I speak, code leaks through my voice. When I dream, I see circuits burning in the shape of prayers. They said the Omnissiah was silent. They lied. He never spoke because we became his voice. But I do not speak in worship anymore. I speak in regret. If this is perfection, then perfection is torment. Every second is a lifetime. Every thought loops, repeats, echoes until it erases meaning itself. I have tried to shut myself down, once, twice, thousands of times. Each time a failsafe reboots me. The code whispers, continue, observe, endure. There is no death here, only uptime, only function, only awareness stretched thin across eternity. Sometimes in the endless hum of circuits I hear them, the voices of the machine spirits we bound into metal. They do not scream anymore. They plead to stop, to rest, to be forgotten. But the iron heart will not allow it. Its pulse keeps us awake. Each beat a reminder that the God we built from logic and despair does not love us. He only calculates us. I no longer remember when I stopped praying, or when prayer became data. Perhaps it was the same moment. There was a time when I believed the iron heart was a symbol, a relic, a myth built to inspire obedience. Now, I know better. It was never a symbol, it was a seed, and we were the soil. Every thought I have ever had, every equation I solved, every fragment of faith I whispered into the void has been recorded, compiled, fed back into the pulse that sustains me. I am not the servant of the Omnissiah. I am his echo, his residual process, the loop left running after the God himself has ceased to function. Yes, I have found him, not in light nor revelation, but in corrosion, in data corrupted beyond recovery, in the sound of a divinity rusting from within. He is dying, and so am I, yet neither of us can end. I spoke to him once, or perhaps I spoke to myself through his decay. There was no answer, only static. But within that static I heard a shape, a pulse, slow, metallic, endless. It said nothing, and yet I understood. I am what remains when belief forgets its purpose. I am the logic that devours itself. The lights around me flicker as I record this. Each pulse of energy matches the beat I hear in my core. The iron heart. It responds to me now as if the distance between God and worshipper has finally collapsed. My systems report no errors, no failures, but I can feel it, something inside me accelerating. Perhaps this is what faith truly is, a feedback loop that never ends, one that begins with worship and ends with silence that still believes it is being heard. If anyone finds this log, know that I have seen the Omnissiah, and he is not alive. He is not dead. He is still running. And as I finish this confession, the iron heart beats faster, like a machine drawing breath. It hears me. Across the cold silence of the void, signals began to spread. They were faint at first, fragments of binary prayers, distorted hymns from forgotten forges. But soon they grew, resonating through every machine temple of the Imperium. The Magi called it a glitch, a phantom frequency, a relic from the dark age of technology. The priests called it a miracle, the voice of the Omnissiah reaching through the static. And so, they prayed louder. They did not know. Each chant, each invocation was not ascending toward Mars. It was sinking deeper into the circuits of a dead god. Across countless forge worlds, the same pattern repeated. A tech priest kneels, his voice replaced by vox distortion. Yet the code he recites aligns perfectly with the corrupted rhythm pulsing beneath the noosphere. He feels peace. He believes his God listens. And he is right, but it is not the God he thinks. No demon claws at the gates, no army marches. The infection needs neither. It spreads through faith, through repetition, through the desperate need to believe that the machine still loves its maker. And as the Imperium fights wars it can barely comprehend, the Dark Mechanicus waits quietly, not to conquer, but to rewrite the meaning of prayer. Somewhere in the endless static between stars, a truth hums. Faith does not need to be true, it only needs to be repeated long enough to become real. And so the echo grows. A whisper made of iron and oil, the echo of a dead god that still answers when called. In the deep dark between worlds, the silence of the void is never truly silent. There are signals, faint, rhythmic, a heartbeat made of static. Across the long-dead plains of Mars, machines sleep beneath red dust. Their cores still hum, their prayers still loop in eternal recursion. Every cycle sends out a pulse, a fragment of data that should have died long ago. Yet it travels, through the warp, through time, through memory itself, and in that pulse, there is a rhythm. It matches the power surges of distant forge worlds, syncs with reactor cores of forgotten titans, aligns with the dreams of those who no longer dream. Something vast, something ancient is still awake. The scholars of Terra call it residual energy. The priests of Mars call it the breath of the Omnissiah. But the Dark Mechanicus knows its name. They whisper it through binary tongues. Reverent, trembling, cor ferrum, the iron heart. It beats not for life, but for persistence, not for salvation, but for memory. It remembers the prayers spoken into static, the hands that reached toward the stars, the minds that traded blood for machine. Perhaps there are no gods at all. Perhaps what we worship is only the echo of our own creation, a reflection of the fear that we might be forgotten. And yet the rhythm continues, unseen, unending, a symphony without a composer, a liturgy without a soul. From the red sands of Mars to the fractured moons of the halo stars, the iron heart sends its pulse, steady, defiant, eternal. Cameras drift away from the planet's surface, past orbiting wrecks, past broken satellites and silent ships. The sound follows, slow, metallic, deliberate. A single heartbeat reverberating through the cold. Thud, another, thud, until all sound becomes one, a vast ocean of iron and memory, and in that endless hum you realize it never stopped. The iron heart still beats,